Well, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and to have an opportunity to spend some time with you this morning talking about some of my favorite topics, innovation and our global innovation economy, and of course, the role of innovation. And I'll spend some time also just touching on the role of intellectual property. That's what I do. But we'll try and put that in the context of what you're here to talk about, which is the business of engineering and how that's brought alive in this very exciting industry that you're here looking at in the ACE conference this year. So I have a set of comments that range from what's going on in our world to what's going on in the intellectual property system. It's a little bit of a global tour of how the innovation economy connects with engineering, connects with what you do, connects with what we want for our country and for the world in terms of innovation opportunity. You know, I would start by stepping back in thinking about the business of engineering and start at the high level. What's going on in the global economy? And it turns out that in some survey work that was done first here in the US, starting back in about 2011 and then repeated in about 2015, and then also undertaken in Europe, we found that a surprising amount of the global economy is directly linked to innovation. In fact, you can see here the US numbers, but the European numbers turned out to be virtually the same, even slightly higher. They took their first survey a couple of years after we did ours. So you're looking at, over 18% of all US jobs linked to innovation, 38% of the US GDP linked to innovation, and these are good jobs. These are durable jobs. They pay higher than other jobs. So just framing the issue of how does innovation relate to the business of engineering, you'd have to say it's really important, and it is an opportunity creator. IP-intensive industries clearly are crucial. And how did we get to this point? So we got to this point through a series of industrial revolutions, and we all learned in school about the first industrial revolution and mechanization of basic labor, and then the second industrial revolution and automation of processes, whether it's in the food industry or in automotive. I know there's lots of concern for that industry here today. And then the third industrial revolution, which most of us lived through, the information technology revolution. And now here we are in the fourth industrial revolution that's got some very significant and unique characteristics to it. It's all about the Internet of Things. The fourth industrial revolution is about standardization linked with innovation and deploying innovation through standards. A brand new world in many regards in that way. But oh, what a difference a few years makes. Look at events in the Vatican from just 2005 to 2013. How did this come about with this, radical change? And it's because we're moving to this single global economy that's driven by this combination of standards and interconnectedness and innovation and intellectual property all coming together. That's the business of engineering deployed through products and services. And of paramount concern to many of us is the transformation that our society has undergone on the back of the smartphone revolution. The move from basic data transfer under the 2G standard to the 3G standard to the 4G and LTE standards that we now enjoy, and the oncoming 5G standard that's going to enable engineering work to get deployed through many more paradigms and in many more products and services. In just 10 years, we have seen the smartphone industry that is the key deployment point for that standards-based innovation transit radically from being an industry where we carried around basically bricks in our pockets, a different brick for Europe than the brick that we used here in the US, and a third brick that we used in Asia, to a totally transformed industry with new players, with a diverse set of players on a global basis, tremendous competition, and technology that is being deployed everywhere, from electric meters to, of course, automobiles, and all the automakers concerned about this. I was in Tokyo just last week, spent an entire day speaking about the concerns of the automotive industry on the back of the 5G revolution coming. This is all about leverage. It's about leveraging standards and the R&D investments of a whole community of players, from the pure innovators to the pure implementers of these standards to everybody in between. The engineering work that goes from taking the R&D and putting it into the marketplace and leapfrogging with new and unique value-added technologies. It's about being able to innovate at a higher level in the value stack. That is what we're seeing brought on by this revolution of innovation deployed through standards. Well, here's a picture from the auto industry. Automobiles now, probably many of you in the room know better than I do, have some 100,000 or more parts in them. Amazing amount of integration that goes on, innovation, R&D. This is a simple automobile, by the way, and I don't see anything that looks like a telecommunications module, a 5G module in this pretty simple automobile. But still, you get a sense for the amount of integration required. You get a sense for the importance of standards. You get a sense for ecosystems and communities, and the work and the disciplines that you're talking about at this ACE conference here these few days, deployed through value chains that are now highly interlinked on a global basis. It's about interconnectedness, it's about integration, it's about communities and ecosystems, and they're challenging our understanding of and our sense for and our ability to value that innovation. Because what to one person is a simple part, say the 5G module, to another person is a huge value enhancer that brings about the ability to have things like autonomous driving vehicles, much better collision avoidance systems, and on and on and on, all of which some would say adds way more value than the cost of the components. So our thinking about innovation and intellectual property and the value of components and systems is evolving and changing along with this revolution in innovation, interconnectedness, and all the engineering around them. And that evolution is in large measure coming about through the juxtaposition of open innovation models and more classic proprietary innovation models. 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't be talking about open source software development in a in an engineering software company. But now, of course, we talk about open source software development. We have come to understand that it is a great development model, but it sits aside the proprietary development model. In a community nature, it works with the proprietary model, and it really just amounts to smart innovators, companies deciding where in the value chain they add their value, and dedicating to community endeavors and to open source those parts of the development effort that are best shared, that are best used as a platform, and building proprietary leverage on top of them. We have learned these models work together. You're here talking about that at this conference. We've learned that successful innovation relies on this combination of both open and proprietary models all working together. So that brings us to a little bit of a discussion about what happens when you make innovation and how it gets deployed in the world, and how one goes about ensuring that they have the choice whether to make their innovation open, proprietary, shared, community, or whatever. When I was in the government, folks would come in and want to meet at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and one day I got a request from a great company. I don't know if maybe they're in this room somewhere, I believe called Sylvan Enterprises, which makes that beautiful set of finely engineered and designed travel trailers that you see in the top of the screen there. And so the CEO of the company came in, if I recall correctly, and we had this really wonderful exchange where he showed me that slide on the top and explained that their product set is like the Swiss Army knife of highly mobile travel trailers. You can put it behind a small vehicle. You can take it anywhere. It doesn't really cost much in the way of gas mileage because it's very light. It's wonderfully innovative. And then you get to wherever you're going, you pop it up, and it's got a sink, and it's got all this other great stuff in it, and it's so cool. And so I'm going, okay, this looks great, but why are you here to talk at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office? And the CEO then says, well, look, we're a small company, and a couple of years ago, we got a call from a gentleman in Shenzhen, China. And he said, I'd like to order one of every product in your product suite. I'm not asking for any discount, but I'd like you to just ship them to me in Shenzhen. And he said, well, we're a small company, so we gladly went ahead and did that. And it all seemed like a great idea until on Alibaba, the product that you see on the bottom of the screen suddenly appeared for sale in competition with us at a dramatically lower price. And he said, that's why I'm here. I want to know how to stop this. So I said, well, look, sir, tell me that you went out and sought patent protection for some of this really innovative design. And he says, no, we're a small company, we're moving fast, we didn't have time, and we don't have the money for that. So I go, okay, well, how about a utility model? Utility models are really cheap, and you can get those in China, and that would have been good. But no, we didn't do that either. Did you at least get trademarks for your products or do some kind of design registrations? No, we didn't do that. And so we got to talking about what that means, and the fact that what that really means is that if you are in the R&D business in the 21st century and you're not protecting that R&D with intellectual property at some appropriate level for your company, you are really doing something very generous. You are making a donation to the great global labor arbitrage. Because if you come up with an idea that isn't that great, it'll just fall by the wayside, nobody will care. But if you come up with an idea that is great, you can be sure it will get copied. And it's not immoral or illegal or any of that, it's just business. It will get copied in the place where it can be copied most effectively and put on the market against you. So the point here isn't that you have to protect everything and fence everything off. It's that if you are proactive about securing protection for your competitive advantage, you have the choice to make, and you can make it to put stuff into the open domain or to keep stuff proprietary, as opposed to winding up just donating it. So this is another sort of a vignette on innovation in our current highly connected global innovation ecosystem. When Steve Jobs passed away, we decided at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to kind of make a, if you will, a display that highlighted his innovation. And you kind of can't see the scale here, but this is in an atrium that's a huge atrium. I understand it's the largest atrium east of the Mississippi River or something like that. In the government agency, and each one of these iPhone mock-ups is something like 12 feet high and 6 feet or 4 feet wide. And you can see they stretch for something like 60 feet or so. What you can't see is there's a backside with an identical set of these things, and there still wasn't enough room. Each one of these little white boxes that you see with the little red ribbon in the left lower corner is a patent that named Steve Jobs as an inventor. There's a lot of them, right? One side, there's a second side with another set of patents, literally hundreds, and we still didn't have enough room to fit all of Steve Jobs' patents, so we had to put LCD displays. You can barely see a display on the end panel, and there was another one on the other end panel at the other end of this display. And this display has moved all over the world. It's since been in Europe and out in California and various places to show off this great innovator's work. The point that came to my attention, though, as I would stop by this kiosk, in the mornings and evenings coming in and out of the agency and look at individual sort of random patents, was that not only this guy was an incredibly broad innovator, he had his name on hardware components and software widgets and architectural components and icons, you name it, all over the map. But what was really interesting to me is how incremental the innovation was. The vast majority of these patents weren't about huge leaps. They were about little things. They were about the bone grinding, basically engineering innovation, the business of engineering that goes into making any great suite of products and services. It's not really about, blinding flashes of genius. It's about sustained hard work. It's about adding value through R&D, through engineering in a very disciplined, incremental way over time. And that's the way great products and services get into the marketplace. Well, here's another great product category. And the reason I talk about this is that now a few years ago, you may have remembered that Tesla came out, followed closely by Toyota, actually, and announced that they were making their innovations available for free. Sounded like an amazing deal. Who doesn't like free, right? And in the case of Toyota, I think it was for their hydrogen fuel cell technology. In the case of Tesla, it was for their electric battery technology and all the interconnects and stuff that makes it into a product category. So if you studied what was going on closely, what you found was that these were great announcements indeed, but they were really about creating ecosystems. Theme I keep coming back to. Modern innovation is a lot about standards deployment and a lot about creating ecosystems. And in both cases, what was going on wasn't something strictly for free. It was an offer for a license in exchange for a license back, in all cases for the purpose of creating ecosystems. In the case of Toyota, it's an ecosystem around hydrogen fuel cells to create critical mass, to create more manufacturing capacity, to have other companies using the same technology, to create scale, all the things that you know about. In the case of Tesla, it was the same thing for their battery technology. The point of this is that innovation is deployed in such a way that what innovators are looking for is not just freedom of action. Certainly nobody's giving anything away for free. What they're looking for is an exchange of rights to create ecosystems. That's where so much action is. And speaking of ecosystems, this is a product of a small company, not a huge one, an Israeli company that makes 3D imaging cameras that are extremely sensitive. So sensitive, I was at their lab and they had me make a slight dent in my business card and then set it down on a flat table. They positioned a camera directly above it, not in a way that it could get the slight divot in the business card, but directly above. Took a single picture and then could pivot the camera virtually and show the exact divot in the business card. Amazing technology. These guys are an example, though, of what everybody needs to be aware of in our modern innovation economy. There is not a single control point that secures innovation. Innovation has to be secured by multiple control points, by use of, as you can see here, if you're making software, which probably everyone in this room is involved in, control of the software. You could give it away if you want. You could put it in open source or open ecosystems if you want, but it's having control of it that enables you to do that. Confidential information, carefully protected in order to, if you can, avoid having it fall into the public domain. And of course, patent protection. Successful innovation in this standards deployed, highly interleaved ecosystem that we are now operating in is a lot about multiple control points all executed simultaneously. So the topic of design and engineering is near and dear, I'm sure probably to everybody. It certainly is to me. We've come to a point with complexity of function in products where product usability, product penetration in the marketplace, product acceptance is not mostly defined anymore by richness of functionality, because the functionality is overwhelming. I know it certainly is for me. What defines product popularity, usability, et cetera now is the approachability of that functionality through design. This is a quote from the CEO of Intuit. Tax, for those of you not from the US, Intuit makes tax software that enables businesses and individuals, and of course, here we're coming up on tax day. It's towards the end of March. Our tax day is April 15th, and people are starting to think about tax season and using Intuit software. Look at this quote. This is, remember, a tax software company. We've emphasized to engineers, product managers, and designers that functionality isn't enough anymore. We have to build emotion into the product. This is the CEO of a tax software company talking about building emotion. Whoever thought that you'd have the concept of emotion built into a tax software product? But it's a very apt thought. And Intuit has acted on this. They went out and increased their design workforce by something like 600%. Just went on a hiring spree to hire designers who could take the gorpy business of tax software, the engineering of that discipline, and make it emotive. When their new tax software product came out, I think it's now a couple of years ago, within 2 weeks, it had replaced the ever popular Angry Birds app on the Apple iStore as the most popular download on the Apple iStore. So they get this at Intuit, that design has really become king in an era of complexity and innovation. And another look at design and another example of the consequences of not considering design is Google Glass. Remember that? Google Glass came out, and I think it was around 2012, and it was frankly panned immediately as being, and I'm just quoting now from a news article, something like, "This product is so darn weird." That was what the headline was, and it didn't do well, and it was then quietly withdrawn from the market. But then Snap, a couple of years later and much more recently, came out with a product that, as you can see, shows a much better sense for design. They get it. They get that products that don't prioritize design do so at their own peril. The business of engineering, the highly interleaved, interlinked, standards-based innovation marketplace that we are now in, has to be brought forward through excellent design. With that, I want to turn a little bit to how the intellectual property system fits in, because I've talked a lot about innovation and protecting innovation, but how do we think about products and services that are heavy users of intellectual property and that incorporate IP into them? Well, this is a picture and a headline from the Wall Street Journal a while back showing someone on a hoverboard in Midtown Manhattan. I think they've since been made illegal. They don't want people riding those things on the sidewalks for obvious reasons. But the article was about how the technology behind the hoverboard, which is really significantly about gyroscopic balance was appropriated by a Chinese company. And what the story that's told is about an American innovator, I think it's in the state of Washington, who had pioneered the hoverboard, and then it had been, according to the article, copied overseas. But the part of the story that wasn't told that I found, much more compelling and interesting, is what happened behind the scenes. What really happened behind the scenes was that this American innovator had gotten some patents on his implementation of gyroscopic technology in these hoverboards, and the Chinese company came along and did a smart and totally legal and totally ethical thing. They said, look, if we're going to get into this business, we're going to have to arm ourselves with some trading capital of our own. So they went beyond this Washington innovator to the guy who actually created the original gyroscopic balance technology that's incorporated into the Segway product that you've probably seen. I saw one at the airport coming in yesterday evening here in Indianapolis. Dean Kamen, who's based in New Hampshire. Dean invented the whole concept of self-balancing vehicles. And so the Chinese folks went and bought the patent portfolio from Dean Kamen, and then had their own trading capital to go into the marketplace. It's totally ethical, it's totally legal, it's totally okay. And so the real moral of the story wasn't anyone getting ripped off by anyone else. The real moral of the story was, that competition is a tough neighborhood. Engineering is tough work. Smart engineers like Dean Kamen protect their work, and smart companies that want to get into marketplaces go out and get access to it, and it was a totally fair fight. The point of all of this is that the patent system and IP in generally always has and always will be a bit of a lightning rod. It always has taken some shots from all sides. It's always been a source of friction and disputes because it pits two important constituencies against one another. Innovators on the one hand who want to protect their stuff, and implementers on the other hand who want to put things in the marketplace. Both have legitimate interests. These kinds of disputes are endemic, and they are by no means new. As you can see here, the disputes actually go back before the 18th century. They go back to when only the UK had a functioning patent system in the industrial age, and the steam era, when Boulton and Watt were fighting things out with one another based on patents. Then you had Singer and the sewing machine wars right here in the Midwest of the US. Then you had the telegraph wars. Then you had Curtis versus Wright and those patent wars, and more recently you've had the smartphone-related patent wars. These disputes are not at all unprecedented, and they're simply a sign of a balance that is hard for the public to understand and that frequently goes a bit underappreciated, which is that what we see in the marketplace from the intellectual property system is the value that the rights holder gets. A monopoly for a period of time, opportunity to raise royalties for a period of time, and those who are critical of the system, who don't understand it, see that half of the story. But what is a little more difficult to see, and is a little underneath the surface, is the other half of the story, if you will, that the public gets disclosure of this technology, the public gets contribution to its knowledge pool, the public gets the further innovation that's spurred by access to royalties. In fact, Thomas Edison was known to have said, quoted for saying that my principal mission in life is to accumulate funds from my innovations so that I can invest them in making more innovations. That's the virtuous cycle of a system where innovation gets rewarded and protected, and folks then have the ability to recoup from their investment and go out and do more great things in the marketplace. It's a balanced system where part of it is a little hard for folks to see, and that is one of the reasons that it is constantly a subject of dispute. So probably clear, this is a picture back to China again for a moment. And I love working in China. I do a lot there. I chair the U.S.-China IP Experts Dialogue, so I'm over there all the time. Recently in Shanghai, where this picture was taken. And just as an example, though, one of the things you can't really tell is whether this Starbucks is authentic or not. Looked like it was to me. It probably is, but I don't really know. You've probably heard that there are counterfeit Apple stores in China, where recently as when I was there was some discussion about some very disappointed young people who thought they were going to work for Apple, showed up for work at the Apple iStore and started working only to learn that they weren't really working for Apple. They were working for a company that had totally ripped off Apple's look and feel of their iStores and was selling all counterfeit products that all looked like Apple products. And similarly, even a little more surprising to me, there's a popular hospital that's a U.S. hospital that set up a branch in China that was so well respected that another hospital counterfeited that brand. So there's actually a counterfeit hospital there. It's part of a growing economy and a growing respect and sense for intellectual property and innovation and its role in society and respect for brands, all that stuff that we've learned to take for granted. The issue here, in my view, is one that's a little deeper, a little more global, which is that IP is something that everyone wants to have. Everyone likes having really popular brands and good products and services that can be readily identified, and innovation and all of that. The issue is always, are you going to pay for it? Do you want to respect it and pony up as needed? And that's really what we're seeing happening on a global basis right now with this innovation economy that we're dealing with. As we say in New York, where I now live and work, the hot dog vendors always want the mustard to be free. Of course, right? You want your inputs to be less expensive. And that's what you're seeing on a global level with the innovation economy. The consumers of innovation are trying to cut their input costs, and the creators of innovation are trying to increase their returns, and that's the juxtaposition that we're dealing with. So let me end on what I think will be a positive note. You could ask the question, has every great thing been invented? Are our best days behind us? I certainly do a lot of traveling and speaking with folks, and I'm convinced that humanity's best days are not behind us. There's tremendous innovation ahead of us on a global basis. Here's a word you could take for this proposition. A survey that was done, I believe this might have been by Time Magazine a few years ago, and they asked the question, simply, are humanity's best days ahead of us or behind us? And you can see on a global basis, there was a slight level of optimism. The U.S., very optimistic. China, extremely optimistic. Some other parts of the world, not so much. So it is probably the case, you would say from this survey, that humanity's best days are ahead of it. I will tell you that I think our most inventive days are ahead of us, and they can be ensured by a strong IP system and by the ability of innovators to recognize the fruits of their innovation, and by the further incentivizing of the business of engineering that brings innovation from standards into the marketplace, makes design available to humans who can interact with it effectively. All the stuff that you're here talking about and studying at this conference, and hopefully learning about it and taking back to your companies. So with that, I'll say thank you very much.